5 o'clock. Oh, look at the dust storm, dust devil. Look at that. Throwing trash. Oh no!
A little gustnado along a outflow boundary caught by Big Rig Steve. And it's kind of a miracle I caught this because I don't really get to watch this channel very much. Things are usually pretty busy, but I happened to see that last night. Some interesting weather there in California with a cold core low. This is what the visible satellite image looks like. Got that tropical moisture coming north. That cold core low in California has moved out into the southern Rockies. Let me take you back to yesterday. We'll look at the water vapor imagery. The main jet down to the south, the baroclinic zone out east, and trailing that, the cold core region. So if we bring that up several hours, that gets us to the storms in California. There they are right there. And we can see that vortex move out into Arizona this morning. There's a look at it on the infrared imagery, the striated appearance of this cirrus indicating strong winds aloft. Then as we go into the afternoon hours, cold core low moves out of the Bakersfield area into the Los Angeles region. A lot of low-topped anvils. The activity subsides during the evening hours, and we find it in the Tucson area this afternoon. And finally, we'll look at it on visible imagery. There's the LA area. That's what it looks like on a clear day. Los Angeles, Ontario located out to the east. And as we get that modest heating through the day, the clouds become more vertical. You can see CBs developing up to the north of LA. And those move out into the valleys, propagating southward during the evening. And at the very end, that's corresponding to the opening footage. Some decent CBs in the north part of Los Angeles, around Pasadena, Burbank, and eventually that moves out into the rest of the city. The surface map for this afternoon starting to look a little bit like spring, bringing up that tropical sector all the way up to Missouri and Kansas. Dew points are a little bit on the low side, but 60s starting to snake their way into Tyler, Austin, and close to San Antonio. And that's going to be the moisture axis. We would expect to find the low-level jet pretty much in that same region. We do have a dry line out to the west from west of Enid to Abilene and down to the Del Rio area. This is plateau region air from the higher terrain of Mexico and New Mexico, and it's spreading eastward over the tropical air. And then further east is the polar air mass from the Pacific. And this is the cold core low that affected Los Angeles last night, tracking east-southeast. And of course, that will eventually be in the Texas region tomorrow. And we also have a fresh incursion of cold Canadian air coming into the northern plains, temperatures down to the teens and 20s up north. Take a quick look out in the Pacific to see what's going on. 1040 millibar high. Fairly quiet. And of course, our usual hodgepodge of frontal systems in southern Alaska, producing some snows all the way from Yakutat to Anchorage and over to Bethel. Cold air continuing to persist in northern Canada. It has been quite cold in that region. This afternoon, temperatures in the minus 30 to minus 40 range, so that is going to be Arctic air. And then taking a look out in the Atlantic, cold air advection, lots of snow showers south of Greenland. And as we pan south, we get back to that little occluded low in Ontario, producing even more snow in Ontario and Quebec. And it looks like the eastern U.S. gearing up for the approach of the Great Plains system. Here's what that upper level low looked like yesterday morning on the GFS panel. This is the 500 millibar mid-level heights and vorticity. That's indicating the jet axis running something like that right there. This is the cold core low, and that's diving southeastward through the San Joaquin Valley and into Southern California. So by evening, there it is. That's going to be around the time that video is recorded, so the cold core low right over the Los Angeles area. And then bringing that forward to this afternoon, that's about where we're at, so it has not really lost much of its potency. The jet, about like that. Jet max indicated just south of Douglas, Arizona, in northern Mexico. And the main trough somewhere in there. But let's see what happens over the next 24 hours. Looks like that low is starting to open up into a trough. That low traverses New Mexico into the panhandles overnight. And that's some pretty good lift coming into Oklahoma overnight. And yeah, it's definitely opening up. Starting to lose that closed circulation. And we just now have a sharp trough out there in Missouri for tomorrow afternoon. But there comes a second one. Where did that come from? Let's back that up. Yep, see that it's crossing the ridge. Troughs do tend to lose their intensity when they're rounding the north part of these ridges. And as they dive southward, they start intensifying. Coming into phase with that long wave trough, that's helping to support that. However, eventually it does open up, and we get this kind of sheared feature for Friday. And then just a quick peek ahead to the weekend. Yeah, another low in Southern California looks a little bit weaker. Friday into Saturday, and this next one coming into Texas around Monday, and wow, look at that. Yep, California getting some much-needed rain. They've had a pretty serious drought problem. And fortunately, these systems are very fast-moving, so they're not really stuck with those big, ugly atmospheric rivers that cause all those flooding problems. A small atmospheric river is good, but we don't want those really bad systems like British Columbia had back in November. And this is how our 90-day percent of normal precipitation is looking. All of the red and orange indicate that our 90-day precip is below normal. So definitely some serious problems all the way from California into Texas and Oklahoma. A lot of the country below normal. Minnesota, North Dakota, they're looking pretty good. Also the eastern Midwest region. As the spring rains start to set in across the southeastern U.S., we should start to see some of these numbers coming up very gradually. No temperature records today. For tomorrow, things warm up out east, ranging from 62 at Boston to 84 at Tampa. For Friday, 86 at Orlando, and that's not even a record. Nothing indicated for Saturday, Sunday, or Monday, so I'll spare you that, but this is Tuesday, 6 days from now, a good possibility of some very warm temperatures in the southeastern U.S. Let's peruse the weather around the country and in the process learn a little bit about visible imagery. We've got that disturbance there in Arizona. It's a little bit off the southeast part of the chart, but there is enough instability to produce these cumuliform towers that you see along the Mogollon Rim. None of that is affecting Phoenix. They're getting the drier air through that region, but yeah, that's going to be mid-level moisture, instability, and upper-level lift. Looking pretty good in California, clear skies and many snow-capped peaks in the Sierra Nevadas. And normally this is where I would check in with Big Rig Steve, but he is off duty in Los Angeles, so we'll check back on Friday and see what's going on. In the Great Basin area, unstable. Lots of low and mid-level cloud. This is cold air advection, stratocumulus, and altocumulus. That's in the wake of that upper level low, northerly flow coming through, moving over that relatively warm ground and destabilizing. A little bit of instability in the northwestern U.S., residual moisture, cold upper level conditions, producing some of these shallow towering cumulus formations over Portland, and you can see some northerly flow moving into Olympia and Seattle. Further out to the east, snow showers in parts of Idaho. Heading into Montana, that's going to be on the tail end of that frontal boundary, the Canadian air mass banked up against the Rocky Mountains. And then further out to the west, that's going to be a transitional air mass. Some of that cool air, mostly in the mid and upper levels, affecting that region, but not much going on at the surface. In the northern plains, more cold air advection, ridging coming in from Canada and driving that cold air in. You can see the cloud streets right there over Minnesota, oriented northwest to southeast. That's going to be some destabilization, some of that very, very cold air spilling out over relatively warm terrain. Even though it's in the teens and 20s, that's enough to get some clouds forming. And with unstable cloud streets like what you see right here, those are going to be oriented parallel to the wind flow. Partly cloudy skies in the central plains, but as you go further to the west, we start picking up some of that upslope flow, just enough moisture, just enough easterly flow to produce stratus and areas of fog and maybe a few snow flurries in there. That's affecting Denver most definitely, but Colorado Springs and Pueblo looking pretty nice this afternoon. In Kansas and Oklahoma, we get to the leading edge of that cold front, running about like that. As you go further west, it becomes a dry front. As we go into New Mexico, we pick up the Pacific system, much cooler conditions out in this region compared to Texas, where there's a combination of downslope flow and advection off of the higher terrain. In between, very gusty and turbulent winds, and it looks like white sands picking up a dust plume. And there's Holloman Air Force Base. Winds 25 gusting to 33 knots out of the south-southwest. Heading into Texas, we pick up the fetch of tropical flow coming up off the Gulf. The Gulf is open. And we've also got a low-level jet spreading over the region. There it is on the 850 millibar chart, 50 knots from Austin up to DFW. And if we drop a sounding in the middle of that over North Dallas, you can see that hodograph is stretched out from 0 through 1 kilometer. Storm motion, if we were able to get storms, those storms would be right off the hodograph, sweeping out large areas of storm relative helicity. So that could potentially be a tornadic situation. However, we are lacking some key ingredients. Florida and the Gulf Coast transitioning to that return flow, easterly flow moving onto the Florida coast, and the better moisture located out in the Gulf. That's mostly heading for Louisiana and Mississippi. Definitely a warm air advection pattern in the central Mississippi River region. Numerous cloud streets, cumulus, stratocumulus heading north towards that frontal zone. Heading up to the Great Lakes, we get closer to that occluded low, which is over Ontario, and an occluded front stretching through the Lake Michigan region into Illinois. And that's helping to keep some of these cloud layers in place. A nice day along the mid-Atlantic coast. Even though we have southerly flow starting to develop, the air mass is just too dry. And you can see what we're talking about there. Dew points in the 20s and 30s, but as you go closer to Kentucky, North Carolina, dew points go up into the 40s. And finishing out the satellite tour, the northeastern U.S., much the same situation, developing some warm air advection, but there's still too much residual cold, dry air. So they're just getting overspread with some high clouds from the occluded system further out to the west. So now that we have a thorough understanding of what's happening in the atmosphere, let's put the forecast together, starting with the Q vectors. This is in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. We've definitely got a very potent system. This is a couplet of upward and downward motion. The upward motion out ahead of that trough, which is located right here, and the downward motion in its wake. So weather should be improving in Arizona this evening. The main area of upper level lift located around Deming, El Paso, Columbus, New Mexico, and as we go forward, that lift heads up into eastern New Mexico and the Texas Panhandle. It'll be crossing that region overnight, and by tomorrow morning it'll be looking like this. The trough, you can just pretty much put that between the downward and upward motion, so that's going to be it. Strong trough moving into Oklahoma, so a good chance of some precip, and that precip moves on up into Illinois and the Great Lakes area for the evening. So our trough starting to lose definition, but it looks like it's somewhere right in there at 0Z. And we can see more action out to the west. You can follow along with your favorite areas and see what happens. So it looks like a good chunk of energy up there in the Great Lakes and more weather coming together in Southern California. So let's start putting things together. We know that the upper level support in the southwestern U.S. is going to be heading up to the Great Lakes over the next 48 hours, and then we're going to have more energy developing up there in Canada, and that will traverse the Great Lakes for round number 2. And then we'll have that southern stream system affecting Southern California sometime around, I guess that was a late weekend. Well, we'll see. Anyway, yeah, that's going to be at the upward motion, working on the air mass. Good triple point. Warm front, cold front, and a Pacific front coming through Texas itself. So lots of precip in Oklahoma for tomorrow morning. And then you can see some snow in the wake, moving into Amarillo, Clovis, and Tucumcari. That snow band will move up into Wichita, northern Missouri, and up into Chicago by late afternoon, moving with that upper level field of ascent and triggering storms all the way down into the southeastern U.S. And we did see that most of that upper air support was going to be confined mostly to the area north of the Ohio River. Down to the south, not as much upper support. So we're mostly depending on the warm air advection, the increase in moisture, all that will produce destabilization, but that'll be mostly from the bottom up rather than the top down. So let's see, where were we? Storms moving into the eastern U.S., kind of weakening out, looking kind of like a big string bean, and I think that's because the upper dynamics are outrunning the tail end of the front. New Alberta Clipper coming into the Dakotas. We do know that the next shot of upper energy is bound up with that. So that's it, traversing the Great Lakes. And then we can see this upper level system off the Southern California coast. Looks like that may be kind of dry. I do see the bullseye in the thickness field, but just not much of a precip indication. And then we get into the extended for next week. Another shot of cold air coming south. And it looks like the Pacific getting active once again. Another system traversing the Rockies and emerging out into the Ohio River region around Thursday. So kind of a mix of all kinds of weather through the central U.S., the East Coast, and even the central Rockies. So we're going to cover that in more detail on Friday. And one of our viewers, Meat Puppet, wrote in and mentioned a possible windstorm for the UK around Friday. Let's see how that comes together. We start out with a broad zone of westerly flow across the continent and looks like maybe a frontal boundary kind of draped like that from this other system that is in the Baltics. If you watch the left side of the screen, you'll see that disturbance coming out of the Atlantic, intensifying, pressures dropping to 966, 964 over Ireland, and a very stout region of strong pressure gradient, sweeping right there into Wales, into central England, and throughout the rest of the country. That's going to be probably overnight, Thursday into Friday morning when that happens. And that'll be the end of it once it heads eastward into the Baltics and we get back into almost the very same situation that we have right now, except maybe the fronts are a little bit further south. And that'll do it for this edition of Forecast Lab. I want to thank our great supporters, people like Keith Brandt, Ron Chalfant, Mike Lammers, Philip Slack, Paul Tukowski. Thank you very much for supporting the program. We'll be back here on Friday for the Friday edition of Forecast Lab. Hope to see you then. Have a great Wednesday evening. Take care. Bye-bye.